2 nights before my wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, my best friend stood up with a glass of champagne in his hand, looked around the room at both our families, and began a toast to the groom. To me. He talked about brotherhood. He talked about loyalty. He talked about how he'd known me since we were 7 years old, and how there was no one on earth he trusted more. And I sat there and listened to every warm, smiling word of it, and when he finished and everyone raised their glasses, I stood up too. I thanked him. And then I took out my phone, and I told the room that Cole had left me a message a few nights earlier, and that I thought everyone deserved to hear it. And I pressed play. This is the story of the voicemail that ended a wedding, exposed a best friend and a bride at the same time, and saved me from the worst mistake of my entire life. If you've ever discovered a betrayal so complete that it came from 2 directions at once, stay with me until the very end of this one, because the way it ended is something I still can hardly believe I had the calm to do. And if patient, unforgettable stories like this are why you're here, take 1 second to subscribe before we begin. It genuinely helps me keep telling them, and I promise you are going to want to see this one all the way through. Let me take you back to before all of it. Because to understand how deep this cut, you have to understand what I thought I had. I was, by any measure, a happy man. I was 2 days away from marrying a woman I loved, surrounded by a family I adored, with my lifelong best friend standing beside me as my best man. If you'd asked me that week to describe my life, I'd have told you it was as close to complete as a person's life gets. I had no idea, none at all, that 2 of the people I loved most in that picture had quietly turned it into something else entirely. And that the whole beautiful thing was about to come apart in my hands. Cole had been my best friend since we were 7 years old. That's not a figure of speech. We met in the 2nd grade, and for the next 25 years we were rarely more than a phone call apart. He was there for every important moment of my life, and I was there for his. We'd been roommates in college. We'd taken road trips, buried grandparents, celebrated jobs, nursed heartbreaks. When I decided to propose, Cole was the first person I told. And when I asked him to be my best man, he'd pulled me into a hug and told me it was the honor of his life. There was no version of my future I'd ever imagined that didn't have Cole in it. That's how much he mattered. That's the size of what I'm describing. There's one memory of Cole that keeps coming back to me, and I share it because it tells you what he was to me. Years before any of this, when my father was in the hospital and I was falling apart, Cole drove 4 hours in the middle of the night, without my asking, and simply sat with me in that waiting room until the sun came up. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He was just there, the way he'd always been there, and I remember thinking that whatever else went wrong in my life, I would always have this one person I could count on absolutely. That's the man I asked to be my best man. That's the man whose voice I would later hear on a voicemail, laughing about me in the dark. When people ask why the betrayal cut so deep, I think of that waiting room. And I don't have to explain any further. And then there was Emma. I'd met her 3 years earlier. And she was, I thought, everything I'd been waiting for. Smart, funny, easy to be around, the kind of person who made ordinary evenings feel like something. We fit. Or, I believed we fit. Our relationship had that comfortable, settled quality that I mistook, at the time, for the deep security of the real thing. She got along beautifully with my family. She got along beautifully with my friends. She got along, in particular, beautifully with Cole, and I remember being so glad about that, so grateful that the woman I loved and the friend I loved liked each other so much. I actually used to feel lucky about it. Sit with that for a moment, because I certainly have. The signs, in retrospect, were there, the way they always are. But they were small, and they were exactly the kind of thing that love and trust paint over without a second thought. The way Cole and Emma had their own little inside jokes, the way they'd sometimes be texting and go quiet when I walked in and I'd think nothing of it. Because why would I? The couple of times Emma mentioned running into Cole somewhere, casually, and I felt only pleased that my two favorite people crossed paths. I want to be honest with you. I didn't miss these signs because I was foolish. I missed them because trusting the people you love isn't foolishness. It's the whole point. It's the thing that makes a life worth living. And it's exactly the thing they were counting on. Here is how I found out, and it's important, because I didn't go looking. 4 nights before the wedding, late, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed with a voicemail. The missed call was from Cole, which wasn't unusual. We talked constantly, especially that week with all the wedding logistics. I almost didn't listen to it that night. I almost let it wait until morning. But something made me pick up the phone and press play. And what I heard was not a message meant for me. It was a pocket dial. Cole's phone had called mine by accident, from his pocket, and it had recorded nearly 4 minutes of audio that I was never, ever supposed to hear. At first, it was just muffled sounds. Movement, a rustle, the ordinary noise of a phone bumping around in a pocket. I nearly hung up. And then I heard Emma's voice. Clear as anything. Laughing, in a room with Cole, late at night. 2 nights before I was supposed to marry her. And I lay there frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, and I listened to the 2 people I loved most in this world talk to each other in a way that left no possible room for an innocent explanation. There are moments that split your life cleanly into a before and an after, and this was mine. 4 minutes of a pocket-dialed voicemail. In the dark, 48 hours before my wedding. I'm not going to repeat everything that was on that recording, because some of it I've worked hard to forget, and because the details aren't really the point. But I'll tell you the shape of it. It was intimate. It was unmistakable. It made clear that this was not a single mistake or a drunken lapse, but something that had been going on for a long time. And worst of all, worse even than the intimacy, was the moment when my name came up, and they laughed. They laughed about me. About how I didn't suspect a thing. About the wedding I was so excited for. In 4 minutes, I lost my fiancé and my best friend, and, in some way, my own belief in my ability to know the people closest to me. All of it, gone. From a phone left in the wrong pocket. I did not sleep that night. Of course I didn't. I lay in the dark long after the voicemail ended, playing it again and again, torturing myself with it, making absolutely sure I wasn't misunderstanding, that there wasn't some innocent version I was too shocked to see. But there wasn't. There was no other version. And as the first gray light came into the window, I felt the initial wave of pure devastation begin, very slowly, to change into something else. Something colder and clearer and steadier. Because a question had formed in my mind, and it was not the question you might expect. It wasn't should I still marry her. That answer was already, obviously, no. The question was, how? That first morning after, I moved through my apartment like a man underwater. I made coffee I didn't drink. I stood at the window and watched the ordinary street below, people walking dogs, going to work, living inside their normal Tuesdays, and I marveled that the world could look so completely unchanged when mine had just ended in the night. My phone kept lighting up with wedding things. A message from the florist. A note from Emma about the seating chart, with a heart at the end, and I stared at that heart for a long time. 2 days earlier it would have meant nothing at all, just a small ordinary sweetness. Now it was almost unbearable, this little symbol of affection from a woman I'd heard hours before, laughing about me with the man standing beside me at the altar. I put the phone down and I made myself breathe. My first instinct, the raw human one, was to drive to Cole's place that very morning and end everything in a storm. To pound on his door, to play him the voicemail, to scream at him, to call Emma, to burn all of it down in one furious morning of shouting and tears. And no one on earth would have blamed me, but I sat with that instinct. And I turned it over, And slowly I understood that it wasn't what I wanted. Because a private explosion would give them something. It would give them the chance to spin it. To manage it. To go to our families with their own carefully edited version, the sad story of how the groom fell apart and made wild accusations right before the wedding. A private confrontation would put my word against theirs. And I had learned, in that long dark night, that I was not going to spend the rest of my life having my word doubted against the two people who had done this to me. So I made a decision, and I want to be honest, that it was a cold one. Colder than anything I'd known I was capable of. I decided that I would not confront them privately at all. I decided that the truth was going to come out in their own voices, in a room full of the people they'd been lying to, so that no one, not one single person, would ever have to take my word for anything. The truth was on that recording, in Emma's laugh and Cole's voice, and no amount of spin could touch it. I just had to choose the right moment to let it speak. And I already knew, even that first gray morning, exactly when that moment would be. It would be the rehearsal dinner. It would be right after Cole stood up, as my best man to toast the groom. You have to understand what those next 2 days cost me, because they were, without question, the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to keep going. I had to answer Cole's cheerful texts about tuxedo fittings and act like his brother. I had to sit across from Emma at a final dress rehearsal and let her kiss me and call me her almost husband. I had to smile at both our families as they buzzed with the joy of the coming celebration, knowing what I knew, carrying that voicemail in my pocket like a stone. There were moments I nearly broke, moments the pain rose up so hard I thought I might just start screaming in the middle of an ordinary sentence. But I held. I held because I had a plan, and because I knew that the calm I was holding on to was the only thing standing between me and a lifetime of being the man whose word wasn't believed. There was one moment, the day before the rehearsal dinner, that nearly undid all my resolve. Cole came by to help with some last piece of wedding logistics, and as he was leaving, he hugged me. The same hug he'd given me 10,000 times over 25 years, and he said, into my shoulder, "I'm so happy for you, brother. I mean it." And I stood there in that hug, with the voicemail sitting in my pocket, and I felt something in my chest crack that I don't have words for. Because part of me, some stubborn, grieving part, still wanted it to be true. Still wanted my best friend back. Still wanted the version of him who'd sat with me in that hospital waiting room. I hugged him back, and I said thank you, and I let him walk out my door, and then I sat down on the floor of my hallway and put my head in my hands for a while. And then I got back up, because I had a plan, and the plan was the only thing holding me together. There was also the dress rehearsal itself, that same day, where I had to stand at the front of an empty venue and practice the ceremony. I had to stand where I would stand, and walk where I would walk, and listen as the officiant ran through the words, the vows, the till death do us part of it all, with Emma beaming beside me. I had to hold her hands during the practice, and look into the face of a woman I now knew had been laughing about me 2 nights before, and I had to smile, and pretend, and rehearse promising her forever. It was, without exaggeration, the most surreal hour of my entire life. And somehow I got through it, because I kept my eyes on the one thing that was coming, the one moment when all of this pretending would end and the truth would finally, calmly, be allowed to speak. I did tell one person. My older brother. I couldn't carry it entirely alone, and I needed someone I trusted completely to know what I was about to do. I played him the voicemail, in my car, in a parking lot. And I watched his face go through everything my own had gone through, and then, like everyone who loves you, he tried to talk me out of the plan. He said, "Just cancel it. Call it off quietly, don't put yourself through some public spectacle, don't give them an audience for your pain." And I understood him. But I told him the thing I'd come to understand in the long hours of those 2 days. I said, if I cancel it quietly, then for the rest of my life this is a story people whisper. A thing with 2 sides. A sad mystery. If I let the truth speak for itself, out loud in their own voices, then there are no two sides. There's just what happened. I need everyone to know I didn't fall apart. I need them to know I saw clearly. And I need to walk out of this with the one thing they tried to take from me, which is my dignity. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he nodded, and he said, "Okay, then I'm with you." And having him beside me, the one person in that whole celebration who knew the truth, made the last day and a half survivable. He helped me make sure the voicemail was saved in 3 places, backed up, safe, impossible to lose or delete. We tested that it would play clearly, loudly enough for a room to hear, and then we waited, the two of us carrying the same terrible secret, for the rehearsal dinner to arrive. I have never in my life been so calm and so devastated at the same time. I felt like the still center of a storm that only I could see. The rehearsal dinner was held at a beautiful restaurant, a private room, warm light, flowers everywhere, both families together for the first time, everyone glowing with anticipation. It was, in every way, lovely, and walking into that room was like walking into a photograph of a life I no longer had. I greeted everyone. I hugged Emma's parents, who I genuinely loved, and my heart broke a little more, knowing what the next hour was going to do to them, because they were innocent in all of this too. I shook hands and accepted congratulations, and I played my part flawlessly. One last time. And across the room, laughing, easy, my best friend Cole and my bride Emma moved through the evening as though they had not, just 2 nights before, been recorded destroying my entire life. When the dinner was underway and the glasses were full, the moment came, as I'd known it would. Someone tapped a glass. It was time for toasts. And Cole, my best man, rose to his feet with his easy, confident smile, the smile I'd known for 25 years, and he began to speak. He talked about our friendship. He said we were more like brothers than friends. He said that in a world where you can't count on much, he'd always been able to count on me, and he hoped I knew I could always count on him. He raised his glass and he said, "To the groom, to my best friend, to the most honest and loyal man I know." And the whole room raised their glasses to me, warm and beaming, and Cole looked me right in the eye as he said it. I want you to understand what it took to stay seated and calm through that toast. To hear the word loyal come out of his mouth. To hear him call me the most honest man he knew, 2 nights after I'd heard him laughing with my bride about how I didn't suspect a thing. Every cell in my body wanted to stand up and scream in the middle of it, but I didn't. I let him finish. I let him have his whole beautiful hollow speech, every word of it, because I understood something in that moment with total clarity. The more sincere his lie, the louder the truth would be when it came. So I let him build it all the way up. And then, as the applause died down and people were still smiling, I stood. I thanked Cole. I said his name, and I thanked him for the toast, and my voice was completely steady, and I could see him relax, pleased, expecting me to say a few warm words back. I thanked everyone for coming. I said it meant more than they knew to have all the people I loved in one room. And then I said, "There's one more thing I'd like to share before we go on." Cole actually left me a message a few nights ago. I don't think he meant to. But I've listened to it a lot these past couple of days, and I've decided that all of you, especially the 2 families here tonight, deserve to hear it too. And I took out my phone, and I saw the first flicker of confusion cross Cole's face, and I pressed play, and I held the phone to the microphone. For a second there was just the muffled sound, the rustle, and people leaned in, curious, still smiling, not understanding yet. And then Emma's laugh came through the speakers, unmistakable, filling that beautiful flower-filled room. And then their voices, and I watched it land. I watched the exact moment each person in that room understood what they were hearing. I watched the smiles freeze and then fall. I watched Emma's mother's hand go to her mouth. I watched my own mother's face crumble and then harden. And I watched the two of them, Cole and Emma, go absolutely white, frozen in their seats, as their own voices, their own words, their own laughter played out loud in front of everyone they'd been lying to. I didn't say a word over it. I didn't have to. I just let it play. When it finished, the silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. No one moved. No one spoke. Emma had started to cry, and Cole had stood halfway up, his mouth open, no sound coming out, because there was nothing, absolutely nothing that he could possibly say. Every explanation had just been erased by 4 minutes of his own voice. And into that silence I spoke, calmly, one last time. I said, I found out 2 nights ago. I wanted all of you to know that I know. And to hear it from them and not from me, so that no one would ever wonder what really happened here. I'm not going to marry Emma. I think you can all understand why. Thank you for coming. And I meant it. Strangely, I did thank them. And then I did the thing I'd been holding on to through 2 of the hardest days of my life. I set down my glass, I turned, and I walked out of that room with my head up. I didn't storm out. I didn't slam anything. I didn't look back at Emma, or at Cole, or wait to hear what either of them would try to say into that ruined silence. I simply walked, calmly, out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, and my brother walked out right beside me, and for the first time in 2 days, I could breathe. Behind me, I knew chaos was erupting. But it wasn't my chaos anymore. I had handed it, cleanly and completely, back to the 2 people it belonged to. My brother drove. I don't think I could have. We didn't talk much for the first few minutes, just moved through the dark streets away from that restaurant, away from the wreckage I'd left behind me. And then, at a red light, he looked over at me, and he said quietly, "You did it. You actually stayed calm through all of that." And I realized, sitting there, that I was shaking, that my hands had started trembling now that it was over, now that I no longer had to hold myself perfectly still. It's a strange thing, the body. It will let you be a rock for exactly as long as you absolutely need to be, and then, the moment the need is gone, it hands you back all the fear and grief you set aside. I let myself shake. I let myself finally feel it. And my brother just kept driving, into the quiet, away from the worst night of my life and toward whatever came next. The fallout, I heard about in pieces over the following days, the way you hear about a storm that hit a town you've already left. The wedding was off, obviously. Both families now knew the whole truth, in the most undeniable form possible, which meant there was no version Emma or Cole could construct to save themselves. There was no sad story about the groom losing his mind, no ambiguity, no 2 sides. There was only the recording, and everyone had heard it. Emma's own parents, I was told, were devastated and furious. Not at me but at her. And Cole, the friend of 25 years, discovered what it feels like to become, in a single evening, a person no one in his life wanted to look at. I took no joy in that, honestly, but I won't pretend it wasn't just. The days that followed were a strange, hollow kind of busy. There is an enormous amount of machinery attached to a wedding, and all of it had to be quietly dismantled. The venue for the next day had to be cancelled. The caterer, the band, the photographer. The 100 small vendors who had no idea that the celebration they were preparing for had detonated at a rehearsal dinner. My mother, bless her, took much of it on herself, making the calls I couldn't face making, because she understood that her son needed to grieve more than he needed to explain logistics to a florist. Watching my family absorb the shock and then simply close ranks around me, without judgment, without a single "I told you so," because none of them had seen it coming either, was the first warmth I felt in that whole cold week. Betrayal shows you the worst of some people. But it also, if you're lucky, shows you the very best of others. I thought a great deal, In those days, about Emma's parents, they had done nothing wrong, and they had lost something too in that room. They'd loved me, and I'd loved them, and now through no fault of their own, that relationship was simply gone, another casualty of a choice their daughter had made. Emma's mother actually reached out to me a week later, just to say how deeply sorry she was and that she understood completely why I'd done what I did. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that she'd been nothing but kind to me, and that I wished her family well. And I meant it. Because one of the things I was determined not to let this turn me into was a person who spread the pain outward onto the innocent. The two people who'd earned my anger had received exactly the consequence they'd built for themselves. Everyone else, I tried to treat with the grace the situation had denied me. People ask me sometimes, the few people who know this story, whether I regret doing it that way. Whether the public reveal was too much, too cruel, too dramatic. And I've thought about it a great deal, and my answer is always the same. No. Because I didn't create the cruelty in that room. They did, 2 nights earlier, in a recording they made by accident. All I did was let the truth be heard by the people who had a right to hear it. If I'd stayed quiet and cancelled the wedding privately, I would have spent years as a question mark, a man with a broken engagement and a story no one quite knew. Instead, I walked away as a man who saw clearly, acted with total calm, and let the liars indict themselves in their own words. Given the choice again, I would do exactly the same thing. But I want to be honest about the part that doesn't fit neatly into a story about calm and dignity, because it matters. Losing Emma hurt. But losing Cole nearly destroyed me. You can, in time, understand losing a fiancé of 3 years, but a best friend of 25 years. A person woven into every good memory you have. A person you'd have given anything for. That is a different kind of grief entirely. For months afterward, I'd instinctively reach for my phone to tell Cole something funny, before remembering, all over again, that the Cole I wanted to call had never really existed. The man I'd trusted my whole life had been capable of that recording all along. Mourning a friendship that turns out to have been partly a lie is one of the loneliest things I know, and I won't pretend the calm I showed that night meant I didn't spend a long time grieving in private after. One of the quieter things this whole experience left me with was a complicated relationship with my own judgment. For a long time afterward, I struggled with a hard question. If I could be so completely wrong about the 2 people closest to me in the entire world, how could I ever trust my read on anyone again? It shook something foundational in me. This idea that I was a decent judge of character, that I knew the people I loved. And it took me a long while to find my way to an answer I could live with. The answer, I eventually decided, was this. Being betrayed by people you trust is not a failure of your judgment. It's a failure of their character. Trusting the people you love is not naivety, it's the price of admission to a real life. And the alternative, a life spent suspicious of everyone, is no life at all. They didn't prove that I was foolish to trust, they only proved that they were unworthy of it. And that distinction gave me back the ability to trust again. And yet, when I look at the whole of it now, with the distance of time, what I feel most is not grief. It's a kind of astonished gratitude. Because that pocket-dialed voicemail, that random accident of a phone in the wrong pocket, saved me. If Cole's phone had stayed still in his pocket that night, I would have married Emma 2 days later. I would have built a whole life on a foundation that was already rotten, brought children into it, maybe, spent years slowly discovering the truth in far crueler pieces. That accident, painful as it was the luckiest terrible thing that ever happened to me. It handed me the truth at the last possible moment, before it would have been too late. And I have never once, since, taken for granted the strange mercy of finding out in time. It's been a few years now, and my life is good again. Genuinely good. In a way that I can tell, now, is real, because I know what the counterfeit version felt like. I eventually met someone and I love her in a way that's quieter and steadier, and more honest than what I thought I had before, and there is no version of her that laughs about me in the dark. I trust her, and the trust doesn't feel like the naive thing it once was. It feels like a choice made by a man who knows, now, exactly what betrayal looks like, and who chose this anyway, with his eyes open. That, I've learned, is what real trust actually is. Not the absence of the knowledge that people can hurt you, but the presence of it, and the choosing of love regardless. There's a thing that happens after a wound like this that no one really warns you about. And it's the silence. For years, my life had a certain constant hum to it, and a lot of that hum was Cole. The texts throughout the day, the shared jokes, the standing plans, the sense of a person always just a call away. When that vanished overnight, the quiet it left behind was enormous. I'd find myself in the middle of an ordinary day with something funny to share, and literally no one to send it to, because the person I'd have sent it to for 25 years was gone. Grief over a death, I imagine, is terrible, but at least clean. This was grief over a person who was still alive, still out there, just no longer anyone I could reach. Learning to live inside that particular silence, and slowly to fill it with new and better things, was the long, quiet work of the year that followed. And I did fill it. Slowly, I leaned harder on my brother, who had earned a place in my life that night that he'll never lose. I reconnected with friends I'd let drift. I learned, for the first time in my adult life, how to be genuinely comfortable on my own, without needing a best friend or a fiancé to feel whole. And somewhere in that rebuilding, I became a steadier, more self-contained version of myself than I'd ever been before all of this. The betrayal took an enormous amount from me. But in the strange arithmetic of hard times, it also gave me something. It gave me myself, standing on my own, no longer dependent on people who could pull the floor out from under me. And that, it turned out, was a foundation nobody could ever betray. So that's the story of the voicemail at the rehearsal dinner. A best friend of 25 years, and a bride 2 days from the altar built a betrayal so complete that it came from both sides of my life at once. And they were undone not by my rage, not by a shouted confrontation, but by 4 minutes of their own voices, played calmly into a silent room, at the exact moment they thought their lie was safest. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do with the truth is simply refuse to say it yourself, and instead, quietly, let it speak in the voices of the people who created it. There is nothing on earth they can argue with once the room has heard them in their own words. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever chosen calm and clarity in the moment your whole world came apart, do me a favor before you go. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because I share a story like this one every single week, and the next one will stay with you just as long. And leave me a comment, because I truly want to know. If you had been holding that phone, would you have played the voicemail in front of everyone, or would you have walked away in private? There's no wrong answer, and I read every single one. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Protect your peace, trust what you know, and never let anyone convince you that staying calm means you didn't care. Sometimes calm is the loudest thing of all. I'll see you in the next story.